Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to our 32nd episode of our featured build discussion series. This week we are featuring Astarift's Elementalist Penance brand build. You can see some of the gameplay behind me here displayed as he is super fast clearing a tier 16 colonnade map in 3.11 Harvest League. If you want to try out this new brand that has just become available and take down all that Path of Exile has to offer with this super well-rounded Elementalist, while also getting to claim yourself a hipster because you're an Elementalist, then stick around for more discussion as we take a look at the path of building, the passive tree, the Ascendancy, and the ins and outs of leveling up this particular Penance brand Elementalist. Starting off with the pros and cons, Astarift starts off by letting us know that this is an incredibly fast build. If you are looking to move through maps quickly, even if they're high tier 16 maps, and take down as much content as quickly as possible in order to cycle through your harvest crafts as quickly as possible, then this is going to be a build that'll interest you. This is one of the few builds that now remains that actually utilizes all 5 different heralds, so if you like herald explosions, this is going to be a build that is going to leave you dizzyingly satisfied with all of the various effects that you can put on display. If you didn't get a chance to play Purposeful Harbinger during 3.10 Delirium League, well, now's a great time to play it because due to its nerf, it's now much cheaper, and this build is going to use Purposeful Harbinger and take full advantage of it. In terms of the breadth of types of content that this particular build can take on, it can take on bosses like Awakener 8 Cirrus, and it can also speed clear maps. It can do both. It's a strong bossing build, and it is a strong clearing build. Overall, this is a very balanced build that will allow you to take on nearly any content that you'd like. In terms of defensive utilities, there's a couple of different layers that we've got going on with the build. We are playing an Elementalist, so don't kid yourself, we're not going to be as tanky as, let's say, a Juggernaut, but one of the advantages of playing with a brand build style means that you can stay mobile, meaning that you can spend more time paying attention to the various mechanics of bosses and packs around you, meaning you are mobile and can dodge stuff. Some of the cons of the build are namely that this is a new skill, so for many players this is a new thing and you're going to have to spend some time reading and learning about the skill in order to fully utilize it. For some of you that's not a con, for some of you I know that's actually going to be an attractive part of the build, that it's a new skill and you actually can try it out and play it pretty much right away, but that's also a con for many players who aren't necessarily familiar with the brand playstyle and particularly Penance brand because it just got released. Because of the way how Penance brand works, sometimes the damage on it can feel a bit delayed. So if you like something that simply destroys a screen as soon as you've clicked a button as a response time, then that's definitely a con to the build. To take full advantage of this build, we are going to go low life, which means Chevron's wrappings is a must-have in order to go low life. And you have to be careful about reflect maps or reflect on Atziri because you can accidentally blow yourself up because you're doing so much damage. The survivability of this build depends on a couple of different layers. Typically, you're going to have about 6,000 to 9,000 energy shield, and depending on your playstyle and your familiarity with playing energy shield, if you're sitting more towards that 6k ES pool, then that's definitely going to be on the low side. You are going to be susceptible to getting one-shot by different types of mobs. If you're able to invest some serious currency into the build, and the further you push towards that 9k cap, then the better off you're going to be for surviving those one-shot mechanics. We use Flesh and Stone in order to give us some blind or less damage taken mods, as well as we always chill enemies due to Beacon of Ruin. We do take advantage of using a Quartz Flask, and then we've also got some block chance, but it's not much to write home about, especially since Glancing Blows is available on the tree now. So let's get into the main juice of the build, which is of course Penance brand. Penance brand has just now come out with Harvest League, and it is a tremendous skill for speed clear, but it's got some interesting mechanics to it. Like all of the brand skills, Penance brand creates a magical brand which can attach to a nearby enemy. From there on out though, things start to diverge. It will periodically activate while attached, adding energy to the branded enemy. Each activation, energy spreads from each energized enemy to an enemy in range which is not energized by the brand. If the branded enemy has 20 energy, each activation will instead deal a pulse of area damage. Energy explodes when the energized enemy dies, or the brand is removed, dealing damage in an area. All right, so what does this mean? This essentially like mini delayed mechanic, and how does this function, and how do we blow stuff up so quickly with a active skill that has delayed damage? When attached, the pulse that goes off goes off and is modified by cast speed and brand activation frequency. Those two mods are very, very important. Cast speed, brand activation. Stacking up to 20 energy stacks as it actually casts and is activated. Upon reaching that 20 stack mark, that's when Penance brands will instead pulse out a part of damage to nearby enemies. We actually want to actively avoid reaching that 20 stack limit. We want stuff to be dead before we reach 20 stacks on a target. For a Penance brand to detonate, releasing all of that energy that is stocked, there must be one out of the two requirements fulfilled. Either the monster dies, which will explode all of the energy within the stacks, or Penance brand's attached duration expires and then explodes all the energy stacks. Because of this, we want the main mechanic that we're going to scale by to be this damage in relationship to the duration of Penance brand. If we use the passive tree that is provided by Astarift that he's built, we will see that Penance brand will last for 1.36 seconds with the 2020 Swift brand supported. So, in actuality, we get an explosion once every 1.36 seconds if nothing dies while the energy is stuck to them. So what does cast speed have to do with Penance brand? Well, there's a very helpful explanation here, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to feature Astarift's build on this, is because it goes into the nitty-gritty details of how exactly to scale Penance brand. This is a new skill, and a lot of the times players simply look at a new skill and don't have all of the numbers and the data and the mechanics behind it in order to actually explain how to scale that particular skill, and Astarift does a great job of it here. Due to the scaling of Penance brand, we need to scale Penance brand based on the brand activation frequency breakoff point. So there's a couple of factors that we need to consider here. Your brand activation frequency, as well as your brand duration, as well as the stacks of energy on enemies before the brand will explode. Based on the calculations that Astarift has made, every single time he first casts a brand, it will always reach 10 stacks of energy before exploding. With the Runebinder Keystone allocated, that means that we can have two different brands on a single target at one time. The cast speed on Penance brand is 0.32 seconds, taken from the POE, and that means that the second brand starts calculating energy stacks roughly 0.32 seconds after the first brand. So this means that the brand duration minus cast speed divided by brand activation frequency, the whole sum total equation of the cast speed frequency scaling, equals 7.84. For those of you wondering what all that means in practicality for the numbers, it ultimately means that we have 10 plus 7 stacks of energy explosions on an enemy at a single target. If we want to cast two brands at one go without using Cinder Swallow, we will deal 17 energy stacks of explosions every 1.36 seconds, effectively 12.5 energy stacks worth of explosions per second. The reason why these numbers matter is because if you just scale up cast speed on its own without caring about these breakpoints, what'll happen is you'll miss the breakpoints and eventually you'll lose out on efficiency. So what does gameplay actually feel like as you are taking on content throughout Rayclast? Well, what you'll do is you'll oftentimes cast Orb of Storms, which will proc Elemental Overload and then Shock, Chill, Ignite. Then you'll cast Penance brand in the middle of a pack 1 to 2 times, run past them with your Quartz Flask or around them while avoiding any projectiles that might come towards you, and then in 1.36 seconds, Orb of Storms or Penance brands will explode the entire pack. This means that you can play this as a traditional brander with its typical playstyle of drop your brands and keep running, let the brands explode the pack, and by the time you've moved on from that now exploded pack, there's another pack on your screen to blow up. For those of you who haven't been paying attention, I don't know, maybe you haven't had your coffee yet today or for whatever reason. This means that you're essentially blowing up every single pack in a map at intervals of 1.36 seconds. At that quick of clear speed, this actually rivals Herald Auto Bombers. It's going to be your own mobility and your own ability to pilot your character that's actually going to slow your character down. It's not going to be the brands, it's not going to be your cast speed, and it's not going to be your damage. It's actually going to be your mobility and whether or not you can keep up with all of these packs exploding. On bosses, it's much the same. You're going to want to cast Orb of Storms in order to proc Elemental Overload. Then you're going to drop down a couple of different brands, so that way once the boss actually activates, you now have those brands attached. And then you can use Vol Righteous Fire after you've triggered the boss in order to give you an extra boost of spell damage. Some of you may have seen that this is an Elementalist build, and some of you may be laughing to yourselves quietly or out loud as soon as you heard that we would be recommending and discussing an Elementalist build this league. Elementalists are hardly popular, and most of the time when players think of brands, they think of old gray men with beards who are slightly balding. Yeah, I'm talking about all of you Hierophant players. But there's a couple of reasons why Astarift has gone out of his way to choose Elementalist rather than Hierophant for this particular brand style of play. Since Herald stacking got murdered in the 3.11 patch notes, Purposeful Harbinger got capped. This means that heraldry got changed to no longer reduce our herald reservation. So if you're going to try to play any kind of build that's going to use multiple heralds for its gameplay and for its damage, anything other than just visual effects, you're either going to need to scale up a ridiculous amount of reduced mana, or you're going to be playing a meme build, something that can't really necessarily take on content that viably. By playing Elementalist, we don't have to necessarily scale up with a bunch of reserved mana, and we can still take advantage of Heraldry and Purposeful Harbinger, even though they've gotten nerfed after the 3.10 cycle. In addition to all of those bonuses, for us to be able to stack all 5 different heralds, Elementalist also gets 25% free elemental penetration. That's really, really good. And we get a guaranteed roughly 20% shock value when we are dealing damage, which is a massive, massive boost for our burst. There are 2 different passive trees that you can take a look at that are supported on Astarift's build guide. The first one is the leveling guide that he used in order to get his character up to an endgame version of the build, and then of course the endgame version of the build that includes some cluster jewel spots for you to get all of that juicy efficiency out of things like Heraldry and Purposeful Harbinger. While you are leveling, there are 2 particular key nodes that you're going to want to pay attention to that will help bring your power levels up significantly as you go through the 10-act story campaign. The first one is going to be Elemental Overload. You simply aren't able to get that much crit multi as you're leveling, and so as long as you can proc a crit every 8 seconds, it's a free 40% multiplier, and that is a big, big boost of damage as you are progressing through the 10-act story campaign. The second big keystone that you're looking for is Runebinder. This is what allows you to have not just 1, but 2 brands attached to an enemy. For those of you who aren't familiar with brand gameplay, one of the things that differentiates brands from totems is that totems can simply target any targets that are in front of them, and you're not limited into the number of totems that are targeting a particular target. Wow, try saying that 10 times fast. Brands, on the other hand, are only allowed to be attached a certain number of attached brands to a particular enemy. Now, this might mean that there's area damage that a brand does that deals damage even though it's not attached to an enemy, but generally speaking, brands deal more damage when they're attached to an enemy than when not. So for us on Penance brand, because we want to be building up roughly up to that 1.36 cap of damage in terms of our total damage and our total burst and the timing that it takes to get to that max amount of damage, having 2 brands is going to be much, much more effective attached to a particular enemy rather than just having 1. This is especially the case on bosses who you might not simply one-shot. Most of the rest of the stuff, especially as you're leveling, is probably going to die pretty quickly, even with just a single brand attached to it. Other than those 2 major keystones, you're looking at some generic elemental damage across the rest of the tree, as well as filling out some life and some resistances as you can come across them. Whether that's grabbing Cruel Preparation up near the Witch, or whether that's grabbing Written in Blood over near the Trickster. You're a relatively low life pool, sitting at a few thousand life as you go through the 10-act story campaign, depending on your itemization, but that's okay because the vast majority of stuff dies before it ever even has a chance to hit you, and you stay mobile because you drop your brands and then you keep moving. In addition to Elemental Overload and Runebinder, when you transition to an endgame version of this particular build, you've got your Shavron's Wrappings, which means that you can go to a low life version of the build and grab Pain Attunement, which is going to act as a 30% more multiplier for your spell damage all the time that you're wearing Shavs. Now that's what I call damage. On your Delirium Large Cluster Jewel, you're going to want Vengeful Commander. We use both Wrath and Hatred, and so this gives us a 30% increased aura effect on both of those big damage source auras. Widespread Destruction is a nice utility to have since it gives you increased AoE as well as increased generic elemental damage. Because we are an elementalist, we can use Sadist, which gives us 15% increased elemental damage if we've chilled an enemy recently, 20% if we've ignited an enemy, and 25% if we have shocked an enemy recently. Because we're doing all kinds of damage and we're inflicting all kinds of different status ailments onto enemies, we are going to get big damage boosts out of Sadist. On your medium cluster jewels, you're looking for Heraldry, which is, of course, massive. Nearby enemies will have cold, fire, and lightning exposure because we are affected by all 3 different types of the relevant heralds. And we also want Empowered Envoy, which give us increased damage from those particular heralds and increased effect of the buff that the heralds are giving us. Purposeful Harbinger now caps at 40%, but we're going to reach that cap of 40% because of the number of heralds that we are using. One little teensy-weensy note here on the Watcher's Eye, because we're using so many different auras, this actually makes it easier for you to get a good endgame Watcher's Eye, because you can look for various different Watcher's Eyes that give you either damage as extra or penetration well, affected by different specific auras. So if there's a particular aura that's meta that makes a particular Watcher's Eye more expensive, go look for one that's another skill that you're still using as an aura, but that maybe is less meta and therefore making the Watcher's Eye a teensy whit more affordable. For your 6th link, you're going to want to set up Penance brand with Swift brand. Astarift typically recommends that you level up using Storm brand until you can get a Swift brand support for Penance brand. That is a big quality of life difference. If you try playing Penance brand without Swift brand, then you are going to notice that the damage on it is severely hampered in comparison when you are using Swift brand in conjunction with Penance brand. So make sure that you hold off on actually leveling up with Penance brand until you can get your hands on a Swift brand support. In addition to Swift brand, we're also going to use Controlled Destruction, Cold to Fire, Conk Effect, and Intensify. In our Prism Guardian Shield, we are going to be using Hatred, Zealotry, and Wrath. This reservation is going to put us down into the low life range that is going to ensure that we get that juicy 30% more multiplier from Pain Attunement while using Chevrons. In your helmet, you can put 4 out of 5 of your various heralds. And then in your gloves, you're going to want a level 3 Enlighten minimum. Go for a 4 if you feel like you need the extra mana. Flesh and Stone, Discipline, and Herald of Ash. Orb of Storms is going to be what procs our Curse, which is of course going to be Elemental Weakness, which is going to scale up all of our damage across the board since we're doing all sorts of different types of elemental damage. For your mobility skill, you can set up Flame Dash with Second Wind, and then you can also support it with a low-level Arcane Surge to give you a little bit more spell damage. The big unique items that you are keeping an eye out for this particular build's endgame version are going to be Prism Guardian, Chevron's Wrapping, 2 times Call of the Brotherhood, and then a Cinder Swallow Urn, potentially with a Wise Oak, depending on how precise you want to get, trying to balance out your resistances, and then Call of the Brotherhood. You want those times 2. While we are using a Chevrons, which ensures that chaos damage doesn't bypass our energy shield, using a Presence of Chayula is a massive help in terms of taking chaos damage in general, since it's got 60 flat chaos resistance, which if you have no other chaos resistance on your build, should at least bring you up to 0% resistance. Well, thanks so much for joining us for our 32nd episode of our featured Build of the Week discussion series. I hope that if you have tried brands in the past, that you will give Penance brand a try again. I believe that it's actually comparative to when Storm brand was at its top tier playability. It is very fast. It's very early on in its life cycle, and it's only going to get better as more and more players try it and more players find different tricks and different tips to help one another improve its gameplay style. I look forward to the tips and tricks that you're going to share down below in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back to each and every one of you that takes the time to drop a comment. Thanks once again for watching, and I hope today is the day that as you are flying around dropping Penance brands, a Mirror of Calandra drops for you as you're an Elementalist.
Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.